Hello and welcome to the Vedic Conversation, where each episode we take a different topic and look at it through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but still very much relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Rory Kinsella, a Vedic meditation teacher based here in Sydney, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Anthony Thompson in London and Derrick Yanford in New York. And we have something a bit different for you this episode, as the tables are turned on Derrick, Anthony and me, and we become the interviewees for a change. This episode is taken from an appearance we made on the Global Shift podcast, hosted by our friend and colleague George S Peterson, who was himself a guest on this podcast earlier this season. George quizzes us on our meditation journeys and our approaches to teaching, as well as finding out some of our favourite Vedic stories. And if you enjoyed this episode, please check out the Global Shift podcast for more great content. And don't forget to stick around until the end, where we'll share how you can get involved in the podcast.
All right, welcome to the Global Shift podcast, everyone, where today I have the honor of being with Rory Kinsella, Derrick Yanford, and Anthony Thompson. Thank you guys so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, really grateful to have you guys all here today. And so all three of you guys are the host of the Vedic Conversation podcast. And even though I have had, you, Derrick, and Rory on my show before, I would love to kind of start by having all you share just a bit about your stories and really how you ended up at this point of becoming a Vedic meditation teacher and now having a podcast on, we could say, the Vedic worldview. So I don't know who wants to go first, but, just a little bit about your story and how you guys all kind of came to this point together.
I'm going to vote for Anthony to start.
Anthony's never been on Global Shift podcast before.
Yeah, he's the beginner.
Okay, I can be the sacrificial victim. Well, yeah, my story is kind of a bit of a, it's very straightforward, but it is perhaps a little bit unusual in as much as I was taught when I was a teenager, which was about sort of 137 years ago. And it was something that was just kind of presented to me. It was, I was an inquisitive guy. I was kind of looking for something that could give me a sense of community, give me a little bit more sort of contact with my inner self. I wasn't expressly looking for meditation. Meditation found me. And I went to an introductory talk. It was fascinating. I thought, yeah, I'll give this a go. And I never really looked back. And for 37 years, I never had any contact with a teacher, any other meditator, anybody in the meditation community, because in the 70s, the early 70s, we have to remember there wasn't any internet. There was no way of kind of searching for people. It was very difficult. And then I found somebody, and that was transformative. Meditation for me was just kind of part of my day. Because I'd been taught at school, it was kind of easy. It just kind of fitted into my daily routine. It was nothing special. I was one of about 250 kids who learned at about the same time. So, we were a kind of school community, and that was fine. And by the time I left school and went on to university and was traveling, it was just kind of part of my life. It was no big deal. And, I really enjoyed it. I could sense that there were some benefits. But at that sort of age, you don't really know sort of much about life. But I could see, comparing myself to my colleagues and friends, that my reaction to things going on around me was kind of a little bit more balanced, perhaps. I got just as excited as everybody else, but I certainly didn't get as stressed. I was quite competitive in sports, and there were four of us in a team, and we kind of really held that team together, and we had quite a lot of success, which I put down to my meditation practice. And then, all the way through my adult life, I was meditating, and then there were two long stretches when I didn't meditate, when the classic incident occurs where you're just getting too much work and you think, oh, I'll meditate later, and then it just slipped, and then letting it be an omission to my day became habitual. It just wasn't part of my day anymore. And it kind of then I kind of got into this whirlpool of stress and overworking. I was traveling a huge amount. I was married. I had 2 kids. I was just busy, busy, busy. And I was really, really keen to get back, but I was desperate to find a teacher. And at that time, the internet was beginning to get going again. And, I get going, and I managed to find somebody. And that was, as I said, transformative. And then, fast forward, I left the company that I was working for, and set up my own business. That was about 27 years ago. And I found meditation incredibly useful then. It gave me a great deal of clarity, energy. I was, had some good ideas. I was pretty calm in the face of some pretty tough opposition. And then it got to the point, in 2017, when, I was kind of thinking, do I really want to carry on doing all this stuff, forever? And the answer was, there's something much more appealing, which is the idea of teaching meditation. And, I think it's interesting when I talk to friends and colleagues in the meditation world, once you get this idea that you'd like to be a teacher, it doesn't go away. It just grows. There's a little seed sown. And as time goes by, that seed gets fertilized and off we go. And it just got to the point where, for me, there seemed to be no honest alternative other than to go ahead and become a teacher. And I really kind of feel that this is, when I started that course in 2017, it just felt the most natural moment. It was the most obvious thing that I should be doing. I felt completely at ease with it, and I have done ever since. It's, I'm in the kind of later stages of my working career, but actually I have no intention of giving up work. A lot of my friends are retiring. They're all kind of making plans to, do this and that. My plan is to carry on teaching. For me, it's a life enhancing, thrilling privilege to be able to pass on the knowledge and the experience that I've gained from 50 years of being a meditator on and off.
Yeah, I love what you said there about how, you had this deep driving desire to become a teacher. Once, you know, you came upon that, it just wouldn't go away. And it reminded me of this quote that I heard once, which says, once the flame of truth is lit, it will never go out.
That's so true.
And what's cool too about your story is, so you originally learned to meditate in school before you ended up learning Vedic meditation.
I learned transcendental meditation.
Oh, okay. They taught
So
you.
that was kind of, TM.
Yeah.
So TM was kind of the flavor of the day.
Where did you go to school?
I went to a school in the southwest of England. It was a boarding school, which was pretty radical, very outward going. And there was a teacher there who had learnt from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi himself in 1967. And so, he was a kind of a cool guy. He kind of introduced some of his colleagues, other teachers and their partners, to meditation. There were about a dozen of them who meditated for a year. Then they went to the headmaster and said, "Hey, we think this would be good for the kids, who are all slightly hormonal and overexcited. Let's give them some meditation and see if it changes." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Let's give it a go."
Awesome.
And so that was TM. And so it was a natural segue into Vedic meditation.
Yes.
Later on.
If only more schools were teaching transcendental meditation and Vedic meditation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm as I've told you before, I definitely want to have you on the show, Anthony, and we can dive even deeper into your story. But why don't either Derrick or Rory, you guys can choose. Just for people who haven't heard your solo episode on the Global Shifts podcast. Why don't you just share a little bit about your story?
I'm going to nominate Rory.
Okay.
We don't normally nominate. This is very formal. Anthony's remembering his school days. Sir. Yeah. So my journey to meditation began in my mid-30s, and the way I tell it is, I was kind of in my early midlife crisis where, up to that point, I've always been an overthinker and overanalyzer, and I come from an academic family, and we're very we try to think our way out of problems. And the way that I coped with that growing up in England was to drink, and that drinking is a very normal way of managing your well-being in lots of places in the world, but especially in England. And I really got heavily into the drinking, and a lot of my life in my 20s and early 30s revolved around it. After university, I've always been into music, and after university, I was fortunate enough to land on my feet in a signed band. So we'd tour around the country, and we'd tour around Europe, and I was a DJ and put on club nights, and it was a kind of atmosphere of putting on parties which involved lots of drinking, but that was very normal, and that's normal for people in their 20s to do that. So I was like, okay, well, this is good. And I would drink more during stressful times, and I had periods of drinking every day, and I had periods where I thought I couldn't fall asleep without having a bottle of wine, but mostly it was kind of social drinking. But as I got into my 30s, and the kind of key moment for me was my 35th birthday, where we had this huge kind of illegal warehouse party that was really super seedy, and there were conversations about who was allowed to bring drug dealers and who got the profits from the drug dealers. And it was in this seedy club that was used as a sex club, and they were like, don't bring any UV lights because you don't want to see the stains. It was like super seedy. And after that, and I DJ'd that night and just didn't enjoy it at all. And I was just thinking, look, I'm 35. I don't want to be like this at 55. I need to change something here. It was just got and I talk about drinking quite a lot in a sense of diminishing returns. I was getting diminishing returns for what I was investing in alcohol, in that I was having less fun, and the cost of that fun was going up. So worse hangovers, which everyone seems to get. So I didn't quit drinking, I quit smoking, and I quit DJing. I was like, right, the records, they've got to go. They're the problem here. And then started looking at ways to change my experience and find other ways to relax, I guess. And exercise was the first avenue I went down, and I started running, and it ran a marathon a year later. I like to kind of go full in on things. So I went from nothing to marathon quite quickly, and I did lots of personality tests, and I did a neuro-linguistic programming course. And then someone was like, hey, check out meditation. So I tried quite a few different types of meditation, including mindfulness. I went to a TM intro talk and thought it sounded a bit culty. And then I met Tim Brown, who, George, who's a Vedic meditation teacher here. And I just really liked how he explained everything. We actually have him on our podcast tomorrow, so the others will see what he's like. But he's a very down-to-earth guy. He's like super normal, and super having super normal, like just a good guy, but really gets what meditation's about. And having had my appetite whetted by going to TM, but then thinking it seemed a bit weird to have this guy, Tim, super normal guy, used to play rugby, used to drink beer, kind of bloke, to have him kind of relaying that same kind of info, but in a really kind of relatable way, made me just think, okay, great, I'm going to learn with this guy. This is something I can fit into my life. And having that real visceral experience of, so I describe it like my head was a clenched fist before, and then it felt like it was unclenching, relaxing, just really viscerally from repeating this gentle mantra. And then I was keeping a diary quite diligently at the time, and quite a few things changed quite quickly. So within like 2 weeks of learning Vedic meditation, even though I've been practicing mindfulness for several months before, I noticed things like I didn't have this compulsion to drink as much. Even like after a week, I was able to say, hey, Wednesday night drinks, I'm not going to have a drink. I'm just going to have a soft drink. And just having that little bit of my rubber arm being strengthened. And so I wasn't as persuadable just straight away. And even there was another bit talking about wanting to become a teacher. Like 2 weeks in, I was like, maybe I could be a teacher of this. That's Tim looks like he's having a good time in Paddington over there. He's got his students coming. He probably doesn't work that much. He gets to, turn people on with this knowledge. So it's super early. I was starting to think about it. And then, just continuing along, getting more knowledge, doing all the retreats I could do, doing all the extra courses. And then I did teacher training in 2016, just kind of as a way of learning more. And there was a point halfway through where Tim even said, like, you can get to the end just doing this for fun, but you don't get the mantras unless you say that you're going to teach. If you want to teach this, you can't have it for your own personal kind of knowledge. It's knowledge for sharing, and these mantras are to be shared. And I was like, made me think about it more seriously. And I was like, well, yeah, of course I want to teach this. And even, teaching is a hard thing, and it's hard to make a living off it. But as Anthony was saying, once you've got that fire for it, it's like, why wouldn't you do it? And the pleasure we get, and the satisfaction of seeing people's experience changing. Like, I caught up with a student last week who learned 6 months ago, and I attract people who want to quit drinking. So she quit drinking, and just her whole vibe of what she was like on day one, where she was kind of really stressy and worrying about lots of different things. And then we had this catch up yesterday, and her new mantra is, so what? She's like, this problem comes up, I'm just like, so what? This thing, so what? And it's such that feeling of seeing that transformation in people, just by, it's not our technique, we're passing this ancient thing on. It's just such a pleasurable thing to do, that once you get a taste of that, it's like, well, why would you want to do anything else?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just from my own experience of being, in teacher training with Tim, he said the same thing to us. He said, you can go through this whole training just for fun, but if you're not planning on sharing the mantras at the end, like, we're not going to share the mantras with you. And a lot of what you said, I could really resonate with, especially the thing about drinking, where you were like, the return on the investment just wasn't the same anymore. And it's true. It's like we're always seeking that first high again, and it's just like every time it, for less and less time, producing that desired effect. It feels like, and similar to you, felt like, why wouldn't I do this? It's like there was a time where I was like, can I really like make a living teaching meditation? But then I realized, like, doubts killed more dreams than failure ever will. And, for me, I had to just like shift my mindset around that a bit, and, realize that it wasn't what was in it for me. It was, how could I help? And I realized that, like, um, there were way more people in the world who needed healing than there were healers, and that, like, it was almost like, my obligation, now that I had learned this knowledge, to then pass it along to others. And you're right. It's like, once you start doing that, it reminds me of what they say, like, in, different 12-step groups. They say, like, watching the light turn on. There's nothing better in your life than watching the light turn on in somebody's eyes when you help them try to stay sober. And so it's true. It's like, when you start to pass this knowledge on, you start to see the change that's happened in people. Like, I remember once I met this girl at the International Conference for Young People in AA, and she had only, she ended up going through my training, and it was only in the second day of the training, she messaged me that morning and said, we did, the first day of the training in the morning before she went to work. And then afterwards, she messaged me and said, before I left the house for work, this is the first time I've ever left the house for work without makeup in like 16 years. Because it's the first time I've ever felt like I was beautiful enough on the inside to be able to go into like a public setting like that without makeup. And it's like to see that kind of shift take place in people, there's nothing more magnificent than that.
And so quickly as well. Like, day one, day two, people come in day two saying, I slept so well. And you're just like, and then when you say it in intro talks, it sounds like a lie, like you're overselling it. And you're just like, honestly, this happened.
Totally. So yeah, next, obviously Derrick, you're next, but I've had you on the podcast before and I love your story, but I definitely, want you to share a little bit about your story again in case people haven't heard that episode.
Sure, my pleasure. So my meditation career started 10 years ago last July.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And
10-year anniversary.
Yeah. And it's funny because I hadn't thought about it until it kind of rolled around. I was like, wow, it's been 10 years this month. And the way that I came to it was that year, 2011, I started teaching ballet at a college that one of my students, because I've been a dancer for a long time. I started dancing professionally when I was 15 and started teaching dance when I was 16, assisting my teacher inside the studio and doing some other gigs and stuff like that. So as a teacher, I've been in that space for a long time. But as far as meditation is concerned, once I got this job at the college, I had a great package. Like I got 11 weeks paid vacation. I got health insurance. I got life insurance. They set up a 403B, like all these different things. And I kind of felt like I had arrived in some way, and I wanted to take full advantage of all of these fringe benefits. So I also had gotten like braces this year because I had like a $2,000 allotment to orthodontic services and all this kind of stuff. So I was kind of looking for ways to enhance my life. And I Googled meditation. And I ended up going to an intro talk in New York City by a gentleman of the name of Michael Miller. And I wasn't all that invested other than the fact that whatever he was saying made so much sense. And he kind of preempted it with like, well, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a this, but he went in and just very eloquently described what the possibilities could happen. And I was like, I don't really know what you're talking about particularly, but I want to know more. So I had decided this is it. I signed up. I think I went to the intro talk on Wednesday, and then I received my mantra the first day on like that Friday, and I was hooked. It was the fourth day of the course for me when it was all over that I was like, okay, this is so powerful. I'm not sure how, but I know that I can't keep this to myself. I have to share it with other people. And so there was a seed planted at the time that I will be a teacher. The path of getting there, I didn't know what that was going to look like, and I wasn't concerned with it so much. And it took about 7 or 8 years for that actually to show up. And it was our teacher, Tom, was holding a retreat outside of New York City. And he had announced that it was going to be the last time he was going to host a retreat of this type inside the United States. And I was like, you know what? I've heard him speak before. I need to go. If he's never doing this again, I need to take advantage of that. And it was at this weekend, it was Memorial Day weekend, that maybe the first day he had asked some people or everybody who attended, was any of us considering being a teacher? And I had talked to some people, but I hadn't made a decision. But I also decided, well, I'll just raise my hand because it is on my mind. And some other people had raised theirs or whatnot. And he was like, good, because if you are interested, then you can use this weekend as one of the prerequisites that you need to become a teacher, which I had no idea about that. And one of the prerequisites is that you have to round like 7 times to make sure that that's something that you can do. And I had done it once before and it wasn't really comfortable for me. So I wasn't sure how it was going to happen. I did it and I felt great. And I was like, I'm not sure how this is all going to play out, but I'm just going to keep raising my hand. And after that, then I started doing the prerequisites. Like the next week in June, I did like 2 weekends in a row. And I didn't even know like there was an application process, how much it was going to cost. I didn't know like, how am I going to get the time off? I didn't know any of these things. I just kept putting myself in the position to, like a lot of other teachers that I had heard about, understand that the path will kind of reveal itself as you keep continuing to go on it. Like nature will organize for you. Don't worry about it so much. And so I was just like, okay, I'm going to do that. And that led me to maybe a year and a half later going to India and studying and being there for like 3.5 months. And that was the thing. The money kind of showed up, taking the time off from working because, an entrepreneur of sorts, and that I freelance teaching, choreographing, but I always worked. So I never had taken a big chunk of time off. But at the same time, I was recognizing the changes that had happened for me since I first started meditating, and the people and the teachers that I was coming in contact with the community, and listening to Tom speak. And like, we have to do this thing called Exploring the Veda, which really kind of goes in depth about where this knowledge comes from. And it was so fascinating to me that I was like, I'm hooked. I want to know as much as I possibly can. And so I did that, came back, and like everybody else has been saying, it's really about doing this as a full-time thing. So I had shifted my focus from teaching dance and choreographing to becoming a full-time meditation teacher. So I had been teaching, but my focus, the discipline had kind of changed. And what I've really recognized too, from being an artist and whatnot, is that I'm not really in it for the income. I'm in it for the outcome, for myself and for my students. And, I feel blessed and fortunate that nature allowed me the opportunity to do this. And I haven't taught a lot, because when the pandemic came, the carpet was kind of ripped out from underneath me, in the sense of we can only teach it in person. But at that same time, I gained a greater understanding and respect for what it is that I do. And so when I started teaching after that and watching the profound changes in my students in a very short amount of time, it's again nature's way of saying you are on the right path. Look how amazing these things are. And now having these conversations and having these two colleagues that we've gotten together to kind of, find other ways to keep contributing to our community and having conversation, it just keeps leading to bigger and bigger and better things. And so I'm really fortunate that it just kind of happened the way that it did. And actually, it's interesting because I know, George, you and I, we had talked before, like we always kind of a little bit, I have that mentality that I want to be further along than where I am right now. But I do wonder, what is it going to be like having been a teacher for 20 years? Because I'm only really in my second year. And I'm, again, the way that I found meditation, I'm going to let nature organize all of those things and allow me to stay in the space where I can keep continuing to bring this knowledge to as many people as possible, because it has changed my life in such a profound way. I don't want to keep that to myself. This is something that, like my love of dance, you don't want to, when you find something that you're so passionate about, you want everyone to partake in it. And that's the way that I feel about it now.
Yeah, I love that. I love too how your story is really a great example of how to get out of the way and let nature take over, and not needing to know the how, right? And I was listening to Light Watkins, guest who you guys have had on the Vedic Conversation and who I've had on a Global Shift podcast, and he talked about how the net only appears when you take the leap. Your story is a great example of that. It's like the net appeared because you took the leap. You didn't take the leap because the net appeared.
Correct. Exactly.
And so, I think just because we've kind of been going in order anyways, and I've asked actually Rory and Derrick both this question, but I figured that I'd ask you, Anthony, just for somebody who's listening who doesn't know, before we keep talking about your podcast, The Vedic Conversation, maybe just like quickly explain what Vedic meditation is. I obviously know a lot of people who are listening probably know because they've listened into this podcast before, but for somebody who doesn't, if you could just explain what Vedic meditation is and maybe a little bit about how it's different from other meditation techniques.
Sure. I mean, Vedic meditation is an extremely simple meditation technique, surprisingly simple, easy to learn, and simple to practice. It's highly effective. We practice it twice a day by sitting in a chair and closing our eyes and bringing to mind a mantra. And many people, I'm sure, have heard of the word mantra. There are all sorts of mantras available, but we in the Vedic tradition are using some very special mantras, which we call bija mantras, which are seed mantras. And these are chosen according to a specific sequence of prerequisites, which we kind of work out with the student, and we determine which is the best mantra for them. And this technique, when practiced consistently twice a day, builds the most extraordinary foundation. It's working in two ways. On one hand, it is clearing out a great deal of stress and fatigue, and it is preparing you to be fully engaged with the world once you open your eyes. And I think a lot of people think that meditation is a retreat from the everyday noise of life. And indeed, I suppose all of us on occasion have used it as a retreat when we're under a great deal of stress and feel bombarded by a lot of things going on outside. But really what we're doing is taking these 2 20-minute sessions, investing the time in those 2 20 minutes and getting the most astonishing return on our investment. This deep and profound rest, which the body is achieving during meditation, which is scientifically backed up, we can talk about that later. The deep rest, the clearing out of stress, enables us to go out into the world refreshed and dynamic. And one way of looking at it is that we're getting very dynamic rest for very dynamic action when we go out there. And when you have a consistent practice, you find that there are some extraordinary things that start to happen. Some of them, as Rory has mentioned, can be quite dramatic, but for most people, they're very subtle. They're subtle, nuanced shifts, which sometimes we don't notice first. Maybe it's the people closest to us, around us, that notice that perhaps we're a little bit more considerate, we're more kind, we're more patient, we are more creative, we seem to laugh a little bit more, that we have time for everything. We have more time for everything, and that we're much more in the present moment. That present moment awareness increases, and that we're not so concerned about what's going to happen a little bit further down the track. That where we are right now is somewhere that we can place our attention and get a great deal of enjoyment, a great deal of connection. But that connection with what's going on outside only starts when we've really connected with ourselves. And, in the early days of one's meditation practice, we're sort of spring cleaning the interior. We're getting rid of a lot of rubbish. We're getting rid of a lot of things that we tell ourselves, a lot of a narrative which perhaps isn't true. And maybe it was true once, but this script, this narrative has persisted, and it's actually restraining us from developing and moving out into being a fully developed human being and showing our true selves. And we need to acquaint ourselves with our true self in the meditation, in that peaceful, tranquil, non-judgmental space. And then when we open our eyes, we can move out there with grace and with an abundance of love for ourselves as well as other people.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that so eloquently for us. I for me, my experience is very similar to yours with Vedic meditation. I think that your share really too hits home the point that we're not meditating to get good at meditation. We're meditating to get good at life. And by practicing Vedic meditation, the other 23 hours of my day gets better, right? And so, when I'm less stressed, because I love that too, you talked about it, the practice really helps to clear out that backlog of stress we have. And when we get rid of that backlog of stress, we're physically and mentally able to perform better at the top of our game in our life.
Absolutely. We feel lighter, and that's the thing I notice with students, that, when they arrive, there's a certain heaviness. They're weighed down with stress, with self-doubt, self-criticism. And you can see the transformation over that learning weekend of 4 days, or the learning course, the course of 4 days. You see this melt away, and they look younger. The stress around their face, when people are stressed, they hold it in their face. There's a lot of tension there, and it just all starts to melt away, and they look younger. There's a brighter sparkle in their eye, and they sometimes they almost seem to be intoxicated with this effect. It's they suddenly go, wow, this, I like this. I want to carry on doing this. I like this feeling.
Yeah. And so, continuing on this kind of topic of Vedic meditation, and, the Vedic knowledge, I would love for you guys to kind of talk about the Vedic Conversation podcast that you guys are all the host of, and really, what the Vedic Conversation podcast is about. I was checking out Rory's website where you talked a bit about it, and you said it dives deep into the Vedic knowledge lying behind Vedic meditation, how it can help us in a modern life. And, it's sort of, again, on the same topic of how, this knowledge, this wisdom can really help us more easily navigate our modern life.
Yeah. I guess we're inspired to do it, as Derrick hinted at earlier. It was when the pandemic hit, and we were all mentors of, like, Watkins, who you mentioned, who's he's a great teacher, but he's great at getting out there to lots of people, and we were learning, how to get that message out widely. And in the pandemic, we wanted to come up with a way to connect with people when we can't connect in physical spaces in our community. How can we do that online, and how can we make the most of this interesting scenario where we're 3 teachers in 3 different continents, all kind of doing the same thing to different kind of geographical places. So we just really liked that idea of creating a conversation in this little format of, if you're watching the video, you can see, it's like play school. We're here in our little squares, just little talking heads, and having it as quite a broad, a conversation like this one can just touch on many different places. And the connecting thing is the Veda, and Veda means knowledge or wisdom, and for us it's this particular tradition that goes back through Tom Knowles, our teachers, and Maharishi, and the Shankaracharya tradition of India. But we're kind of not closed around that. We have teachers of other traditions, and mindfulness people, and just trying to, I guess, inspire people we're from this tradition of Vedic, but inspire people to meditate and talk about what meditation can bring. And we often end up, like we have on this podcast here, talking about people's journeys. So people love stories, and we often find that we say, hey, tell me your journey to meditation, just as you did to us, and then that's an hour that's an hour gone.
Right.
And it's so easy, especially with teachers of this, because they've been inspired to share. And what Light was really good at when he was mentoring us is just bringing out the importance of story and getting us to work on how we tell stories. And I guess what we do in the Vedic conversation is just pick other people and hear their stories. Like, we had you on recently, George, and it's great. All you have to do is say, "Hey, what's your story?" And then it just kind of all flows out. So it's kind of the question is basically just start talking, whatever that prompt would be. And we had a few different approaches. So in the first season, we're on season 4 now. We were a bit more structured, and we did it just between ourselves, and we would pick a topic each week, and we would say suffering or resilience or sleep. I can't remember what the early ones were, and we'd each we'd prepare a story, and we'd say, right, resilience, I ran a marathon in 2015, I'll tell that story, which was kind of good in that was the format we went with before. But as we've developed, we've kind of run dry of stories. I can't tell my marathon story again. I can't tell my drinking story again. So we kind of emptied that barrel, and we're now kind of filling that barrel up with other people's story and wisdom. But yeah, it's been great, especially during this lockdown period where we're all international people and travel around and go to retreats and all these things, and not being able to do that. And this is a good way to kind of dip into other places around the world and experience different time zones and get up at 6 in the morning and stay up till 10 at night.
Yeah, that's what you guys do, is you guys share these stories and you have conversations where you're able to share the Vedic wisdom. And I love your show, season 4. Is there like a way, like, you guys come up with like how many episodes is it going to be? Is that the same each season? And how do you guys determine that? And like, also, as you were talking about, your guests, and you don't just have Vedic meditation teachers on. I like how
I mean, we mostly do, but
yeah, totally. But there are other teachers that have been on there, and really what you're doing, I think, is just like you said, like you're expanding your reach, and you're being able to get this knowledge out to more people, especially during a time where recently you couldn't share this knowledge with people in person. And so I'd love for you to just kind of, maybe Derrick, you can jump on this question, just talk a little bit more about like how you guys kind of determine how long the seasons are, and just like your kind of approach to bringing on guests and expanding the community in the hopes of creating a global shift. Because when enough of us kind of retain this knowledge and start to apply it to our lives, we'll kind of shift the way we move through the world. That's how we're going to create this shift, I think, that deep down we all desire.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the things about why we really came together and made the decision to actually pull the trigger and do it, because when Light had first suggested it, I would say the three of us had a bit of resistance. We were like, can we? Great idea, but how? Kind of, is it really, can we pull it off? And just like everything else, it was like, we're not going to know unless we do it. And the best way to get started is to get started. So that's really just what we did. We just started with something. We came up with a format. We kind of just drafted it out and then started with the idea that, if it's not good or we don't like it, we don't have to present it, but let's do it anyway. Because I think at the heart of it was two things. One, we wanted to provide more for our community, something where they could have something else to hear conversations about our stories, about our students, for people in the community, and maybe people who are maybe interested in maybe meditating, things of that nature. But also, I think the other part of it, and why we chose the story format, was to remain relatable to other people. So when you hear the word Vedic and then Vedic knowledge, if you've never heard that term before, it can be very off-putting. So we kind of wanted to present a platform where it's like, we're going to take the mysticism out of that, because we're just three regular guys who happen to teach meditation, and we have everyday human stories just like everybody else. And we want to be able to share that with other people and just, okay, let's have a conversation. I think what our idea really is making this is the starting point of how this can become an even larger global conversation with a myriad of different people and a large audience. And we're trying to engage people a bit more, like come on our show, share with us ideas that you have, because instead of us just professing our own ideas or having guests, we'd love to take our cues from the audience, and actually relate. And I would love, I think for us too, is when it's more feasible and we can be in person, that we do a live event, that we're just having a live conversation with an audience and kind of see where that takes us. And so, if you, for how the way I kind of show up for my students, I'm always saying, take it as it comes. And as it comes, take it. And I think engaging with my colleagues in a podcast like this, we have to take our own advice. It's a great way for us to kind of try on the things that we talk about so much, especially when we come to scheduling conflicts or, how many seasons are we going to do? How long are we going to do it? We take it as it comes. We're not so, again, rigidly attached, which is another thing that we talk about in this community and how we need to allow and let go. So I can say from my own perspective, even like we had an episode today that we recorded, every time we start to have a conversation, it informs the way that I want to show up more in the world. And so for me, it's like a mirror kind of thing. What is it that I want? What's being reflected back to me? How can I change? How can I make the community more connected and things of that nature? So I don't know that we're so anything except for let's just try this. Let's try this. Let's try that. Let's get other people on and kind of jump in the river and see how that it flows. And nothing, we can do whatever we want. And I guess the last thing that I'll say about all of that is, one of the benefits that we talk about that